Everyone, it's Ryan Lizza with Telus News here for my weekly chat with Steve Schmidt of The Warning. Steve, how was your weekend, sir?
It was good. How's yours?
It was good, as you can tell from the unusual artwork. This beautiful owl behind me. I'm not in my native habitat of Washington, but down near Chapel Hill, North Carolina, um, visiting some friends and turned Bodie, the city dog, into a bit of a country dog this weekend. Got him out into the woods, swimming a little bit, and playing. And he had his first, so two firsts for Bodie since I know everyone cares. One, he swam for the first time. And two, and I'm looking off because I'm looking at him being a good boy, just sitting on this bed here and not attacking me. And two, he had his first big dog park experience with a lot of dogs. So that was fun. What kind of trouble did you get into this weekend?
I did a lot of gardening this weekend,
You don't look
Ryan.
like the gardening type.
I hauled giant bags of dirt and pallets of flowers and did a lot of work.
I'm gonna
A
fact
lot of
check
work.
this. I'm gonna fact check this with
hmm
Lisa. Just to
hmm No, it's
just.
true. It's true. No, I like gardening.
All right, and Bodie wants to say hi because then he's going out, but he wants to say hi because he's getting so
Oh,
big and he's
look at
actually
that
grown a
guy.
lot just in the last week.
Look at
So
that
Bodie, say
guy.
hello. And he's extremely.
Trump doesn't like dogs. I've always
Trump
thought
hates
that
dogs.
said a
It's one
lot.
of.
Yeah.
It says a lot. In fact, I judge all when I walk around DC now. I judge all people by whether they say hi to Bodie or not.
Yeah.
And if there's no reaction, there's something wrong with that person.
hmm hmm
Um, all right, let's start. I want to talk about the Supreme Court decision from last week because I have kind of some things to rant about there. But let's start with the reconciliation bill. Um, I don't think you really can't find any group, any support for this bill um, anywhere except people who just sort of blindly support whatever Trump supports. Um, it doesn't poll, it's not popular at the polls. All sorts of Republicans are scared of voting for this thing for different reasons. It's just a huge piece of garbage. And um, I thought, well, let me stop there. I want to talk about what happened uh, in the Senate vote, the procedural vote, um, and some of the Republicans who bailed and then flipped their votes, and then what happened with Tom Tillis. But give me your kind of big picture thoughts about this bill and what people should know.
It may be the most corrupt piece of legislation in American history. Just full stop. It's incredible.
And corrupt because it's just this hodgepodge of special interest giveaways funded by a tax on healthcare for the poor and middle class, but not funded enough because it explodes the deficit by trillions of dollars. Is that what you mean when you mean by corrupt? That's
Well,
sort of the
I
way I
I
see it.
mean it's first off, let me talk about this as a vestigial Republican, a conservative, how a true conservative would look at this piece of legislation. And they would find it abhorrent, reckless, irresponsible, unfunded tax cuts that really change the nature of the tax code, making it thoroughly regressive. Right? So we live in a country where the middle class pays a massive subsidy to the richest corporations and the richest human beings who have ever lived on earth. And you saw a pristine example of that this weekend in Sicily with the Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez wedding, which I think is an obscenity.
Wait, I
$50
this tells you how.
million.
Wait, but Steve, just this tells you how closely I'm not following this. Was was it Sicily or Venice? It was Sicily.
Excuse me, it was Venice.
All right, just wanted to make sure.
It was
Just want to make sure
Venice.
because I wasn't following this closely.
You are
That's the.
correct. I
I
don't
think
know
that's the
why I said
one.
that.
No, no, no.
And I
That's
knew
the one
that.
thing I
And
knew about
so
it. I couldn't stomach the coverage.
it's the tackiest spectacle that's occurred in my 54 years. There's never been a moment of vulgarity and excess ever.
Just
Not since 1970 did anyone is $50 million. It is an obscenity. And so while that is happening, this man who sat in the front row with the other richest men in the world, including Elon Musk, who vandalized the government for a few months before the coup de grace, the grand finale, the pièce de résistance, which is this. And the this strips 17 million people from healthcare. It strips $182 billion in food assistance for the poorest Americans to give tax breaks not to wealthy people, not to millionaires, but to a billionaire class that has wealth that is incomprehensible. And this is a great deficit in even being able to talk about this, right, in a way that people can understand it. And I use this analogy. Maybe some people, if they're repeaters, have heard it before. If I say to you, I'm going to meet you in a million seconds, that's in 12 days. I say to you, I'm going to meet you in a billion seconds, that's 33 years. I'm going to tell you what the difference now between a billion and a trillion is. I say trillion seconds, that's 33,000 years.
yeah,
That's the
incomprehensible.
difference between a billion and a trillion. And this monstrosity imposes $4 trillion of debt on our children to give money to people like Jeff Bezos while gutting the social safety net. And Elise Slotkin talks about this singularly. And she may, because she's singularly the person who talks about it, get it in the Democratic Senate conference, which is if you do that and you live in a country where 40% of the people have $400 of cash available, you destabilize democracy. Is you have a political question.
So,
Everybody says, well, how did Zoran Modami win this election in New York? Well, very simple answer. He beat, functionally, the exact same people that Donald Trump beat. He beat the exact same people that Donald Trump beat. And so the revulsion against the corruption and the fecklessness of those people are so great. New York, Democratic Socialist, presidential election, MAGA. But maybe the Democratic Party will start to hear the message a little bit about the deep disdain with which they're held by so much of the country that these travesties have been allowed to accumulate. And I want to say one other thing about this bill that no one is talking about. And it is that there is an amount of money appropriated that makes ICE as well funded as the French military, right? Right. Amounts of money that will change the character, the complexion, the feeling of being in the United States. It will turn the country into a police state. The big, beautiful bill is a police state bill. You have masked federal agents running everywhere within 6 months of this without public debate, without opposition, really, because some fool Democratic pollster who works for Chuck Schumer has advised all these senators that the strongest part of the Trump agenda is the immigration enforcement. So let's not talk about that. When in fact, politics in the moment compels you to attack Trump at his strongest point until that line breaks. Because if there is anything that's un American, and there's a lot of un American things in this legislation, but nothing exceeds the funding of a secret police army, which is what this legislation does. It's a moral abomination. And the fact that 132 million public acres were going to be sold off of public land and that got stripped out of it was an act of unprecedented theft. It's an extraordinary moment in the country.
I agree with you. I mean, the combination of things that's happening this week and last week, the that's coinciding with this legislation, is important to point out. And that's why I love talking to you, Steve, because you have the ability to connect these things. But that wedding in Venice with the most unself-aware people imaginable, uh, and the Americans at that wedding will be the greatest beneficiaries of this bill, not the people who voted for Trump. The Republican Party is now a working class party in a lot of ways. Its share of the working class vote bigger than it's ever been. Those are not the people who benefit from this bill. It's the same group of billionaires that were there applauding Trump on Inauguration Day. I wanna point out how this bill might actually be worse, and just to get into the weeds a little bit, some rocky shoals it might hit in the House that people should pay attention to. And I think it's very, very instructive what happened last week when this bill ran into an inevitable hiccup in the Senate, and a bunch of Republican senators decided not to vote for it. Some of them because they didn't think the bill was cruel enough, um, and wanted more cuts. So Rand Paul, he bailed. He didn't vote for it. I'll give Rand Paul a little bit of credit because he has sort of abandoned a lot of his alleged libertarian beliefs in recent years. And he's not voting for this thing for fiscal reasons. So uh, to Rand Paul. Uh, but then Rick Scott from Florida, he switched his vote, and sorry, I want to back up. Ron Johnson of Wisconsin was one of the holdouts, and he actually changed his vote to yes on Saturday to help clear this thing and to ensure that JD Vance didn't have to do a tiebreaker. And the reason, here's how they got Ron Johnson, one of the worst senators up there, to support this monstrosity. He was promised that Trump, I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal, and Senate leaders would back the Scott Amendment. Okay, that's why I mentioned Scott there. What is the Scott Amendment? That's a proposal by Rick Scott that will be voted on today. Might have happened already. I just haven't checked the latest. That will roll back Barack Obama's Medicaid expansion. So you just mentioned a number of how many people are going to lose health care in the current bill. To secure the vote of one senator, they promised him that they would support a rollback of the Medicaid expansion. That will kick off millions of more people right now who get their health care through Medicaid. And so that is one of the most important things to watch today. You're going to see a lot of bullshit, a lot of political posturing in what they call votorama today. But by the end of the day, there will be some changes to this bill, and that's the one to watch. Now, there are a lot of House Republicans who don't want that. They don't want it because they will lose election next year if they voted for the rollback of Medicaid. These are, I don't know if you can call them moderates, but that's the sort
No,
of
there are
shorthand
no moderates.
that's the shorthand we have for them. They're people who are in Harris or Biden districts who could lose if they vote for this. So it could sabotage the bill in the House. As you and I know, they always manage to get these things through either way. So that is a vote to make things worse. So that was how they got Ron Johnson's vote. Tom Tillis of North Carolina, he voted against this thing, and it was just, to me, an amazing thing to behold, to watch Tillis free himself of the grip of the Republican Party in one day and tacitly admit that he has not been able to vote his conscience, that he has not been able to be independent, that he has not been able to do what he wanted to do because he lived in fear of Donald Trump. And for people who are watching who don't know what happened, Trump threatened to primary Tillis in North Carolina, and Tillis came back and said, fuck you, you can't fire me, I quit. And he is now retiring. It's now the Democrats' number one pickup opportunity, North Carolina. That shows you how tough their map is, that North Carolina is their number one pickup opportunity. And then Tillis says this on the Senate floor on Sunday night, arguing that the Senate's bills already, the current bill without the totally reckless amendment from Rick Scott, but as it currently stands, its changes to Medicaid would betray the voters and the president's promises to target waste, fraud, and abuse. That comes from the Wall Street Journal. Here's what Tillis actually said. The people in the White House advising the president, and I love when they say things like this, like it gets Trump off the hook. The people in the White House advising the president, they're not telling him that the effect of this bill is to break a promise. I'm telling the president, you have been misinformed. You supporting the Senate, he calls it the Senate mark, the Senate bill, will hurt people who are eligible and qualified for Medicaid. They kicked this guy out of the Republican Party. He's done. He's retired. And so that's what happened here, Steve. You had the Ron Johnson and Rick Scotts of the world and the Tom Tillis of the world. Ron Johnson and Tom Tillis both voted no. They threatened Tillis with a primary. They promised Johnson, we'll make this bill even worse. We'll get rid of the Obamacare Medicaid expansion. And Ron Johnson voted yes. So those were the two directions that they had, and that's the direction it's going.
Tom, there's nothing, I mean, nothing that brings me closer to the aneurysm line than the assertion and argument that you just made, uh, delivering the Tillis position, right? This idea that I could not oppose this. I could not speak my mind. I could not assert my conscience. Tom Tillis is a pussy, and I'm happy he's out of the Senate. He's a feckless man, and in the end, I guess he didn't have the stomach to pull the trigger, right, on the closure of hundreds of rural hospitals all over his state, which makes him really worse than most of his colleagues because he didn't have the guts to finish off what he set in motion, and he took the coward's way out. And so let's jump ahead to what this bill is because it can't be stopped. And elections have consequences. And the American people made a choice with 49.5% of us. And in a democracy, and in our system, 49.5% of the country is a sufficient number to poison the entirety of the country. And they did. They elected Donald Trump to the presidency, and that is going to be a disaster that ranks among the greatest in the history of the country. And we're just getting started. The first phase, the setup phase, of the Trump administration is now over. And they have reordered the relationship between the state and the people, between the government and the citizen, and it will have profound consequences. And so all these people who got online with this, who were cheering, in 2026 will face election. And what they signed was a suicide note with their yes vote when it's cast. And Joni Ernst is going to lose her seat. And Senator Moran in Kansas is going to lose his seat. Susan Collins is going to lose her seat. And there's going to be a Democratic majority in the United States Senate. And there's going to be a substantial Democratic majority in the House. But the Schumer era is over. And so there's a question, right? Who did Mondami beat again? Right? Same guys Trump beat. And so no more. New faces, new voices, new leaders to confront a new era that will take 10 to 15 years, more like 15, to dig out from the disaster that these 4 years will leave behind.
I think the amount of power that this bill is going to cede to the executive with this massive expansion of ICE, compounded with the gutting of healthcare for the poorest and both for the poor Americans, but also people in the middle class who are just one healthcare disaster away from, losing everything they have, and who that's what
Yeah.
med that's what that Medicaid expansion targets. It's people who are doing okay, they can get by if they have that healthcare subsidized by the government. And they lose that and they're fucked. They're fucked. And millions of people like that, millions of people, a good percentage who voted for Trump are going to lose are going to lose that. This especially with what Scott is proposing is another attempt to do what Republicans have been trying to do since 2000. Well, really since Obamacare passed, since 2010. And what John McCain put a nail in the coffin of this effort back in the first Trump administration when he famously voted with the thumbs down on rolling back Obamacare. But this bill is an attempt to do it, to tuck it in there, pay for some of the tax cuts for the rich, and it's going to have a devastating effect long term, exacerbating exactly what you're talking about here, Steve, is just this revolt against elites, against every institution, against Washington, against people who don't see it coming, like Schumer and others. But in the short term, and you may be right about next year's midterms elections, that there's a big correction. But in the short term, it's going to make Trump more powerful. It's giving him the resources to continue this unprecedented masked, federal police assault on people across the United States. And something else. So that's Congress. But something else happened, Steve, since we last talked, which is very technical. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on all the ins and outs of this decision, but we should talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision.
I do. I just want to say one thing, though, before we get into the Supreme Court, because you raised something about the betrayal of Trump's base by Trump. And I've tried for 10 years to make this point, and obviously inadequately. Uh, but I'm gonna try it through the prism of what you just said. I am a Jersey guy, right? I haven't lived in the state in 30 years, but I'm a New Jersey guy. I was born in New Jersey. I grew up in North Plainfield, New Jersey. If you grew up in North Plainfield, New Jersey, Donald Trump has been front and center in the culture since I was 7 or 8 years old. It was the
Yeah, I grew
first
up on Long
time
Island, same deal.
Donald Trump registered. And what I have tried to say, right, to the American people with the platforms I've had on MSNBC, on the Warning, on interviews, is that Donald Trump, in every single deal he has ever been in, has fucked the people he went into business with. Not once, not twice. Every single fucking deal ever, Donald Trump fucks you. Fuck the contractors in Atlantic City. In each instance where he had power that he could exert for advantage in the use of the wrong against the right, he did it 100% of the time. And so this rip-off artist, this con man with a fake university, as Mr. and Mrs. Smith in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, who have been stoked into insanity and rage by Fox News and a right-wing media. The Democratic Party didn't take anything from them. The person who took things from them was the gang that they trusted. The people who told them that there were people less than them to look down on, that there were people to be afraid of who weren't like them. And all of that accumulation has led to this precise moment where, in the haze and the smoke of the great distraction, comes the greatest theft in American history. And Donald Trump did just like, as the parable tells the story about the frog and the scorpion. And the scorpion says to the frog, "Will you give me a ride on your back across the river?" And the frog says to the scorpion, "I cannot." And the scorpion says, "Why not?" And the frog says, "Well, because you'll sting me and will drown and die." And the scorpion says, "But I'm on your back. If I sting you," and so the frog evaluates the scorpion's logic and rationale and puts him on his back and feels his sting in the middle of the river. And as they both start to drown, the frog says to the scorpion, "Why did you sting me?" And the scorpion says to the frog, "Because it is in my nature." And that is what has not been understood about the scumbag, the liar, who sits in our house, the people's house, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, lying about the effectiveness and the efficacy of these military strikes, lying about the economy that's contracting, lying about the cuts that are coming. But now all the bullshit talk is gone and over, because the hospital that was there will not be there. It will be gone. And the service that was there for the hungry kid, just like the hungry kid in Africa, it's gone. It won't be there. So there is no going back There is no restoration to the Barack Obama era. There is a rebuilding of a social compact, a new deal, a fair deal, a square deal, whatever you wish to call it, that will require guts, integrity, vision, and a connection to the country that very few Democrats in that Senate, not named Elise Slot, can have. She's not alone, but there's not a lot of them.
No, there's not. They don't understand. They don't understand, and they're too immersed in Senate minutia to understand the bigger fight that's going on. Um, I want to talk about the story at the Supreme Court, Steve, sadly, is the same story as what's going on in Congress. And that is um, either blindly or willfully um, ceding more power to Donald Trump in the middle of his massive expansion of executive authority. So just as the Senate today is about to boost his militarization of ICE and make what he's doing in front of us worse. The Supreme Court did something um, that has a lot of legal scholars, and not just on the left, deeply, deeply troubled. And I want to read a little bit from the dissent that all three of the liberals on the court signed on to. Judge Ketanji Jackson, I don't have her dissent in front of me, but hers was even more fiery than this, and I recommend people who are watching this check that out. But just to make this simple, this was a case about birthright citizenship. Every legal scholar who is worth anything agrees that birthright citizenship, as written into the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, is the law of the land. On day one, Donald Trump, via executive order, which is just a document the president signs, nothing more than that, decreed that birthright citizenship is no longer the law of the land. He basically crossed out a few lines that are written into the US Constitution. Naturally, lower courts immediately struck this down, saying this is plainly unconstitutional, and by the end of this legal process, it's going to be declared as such. So in the meantime, across the nation, we are implementing a stop to any implementation of this executive order. Very, very reasonable. Republicans would have been arguing for the exact same thing if Barack Obama, say, canceled the Second Amendment on his first day in office, or rewrote it to his liking. So this goes up to three courts implemented these injunctions. Right, there are 20 some odd injunctions on other Trump executive orders and other rules that he's put forward. But this one is the one that goes to the Supreme Court. The underlying case is as clear as can be. Birthright citizenship is the law of the land. And so instead of making the case about birthright citizenship, the Justice Department, the Trump administration says, well, we're going to fucking lose that. So they go in and they make the case about the injunction, about the nationwide injunction. And 6-3, this court decides, after decades of nationwide injunctions that courts have been putting forward, that you can no longer go beyond remedying the with an injunction the anyone beyond the actual plaintiffs in the case. All right, so absurd because forget about the merits of a nationwide injunction, but the underlying case is about a completely lawless executive order that this court just completely ignores. And I just want to read a little bit from the dissent to understand the character of what's going on here and the power that this decision cedes to Donald Trump. So this is Kagan. I'm sorry, this is Sotomayor, I believe, writing for the court. Um, no right is safe in the new legal regime the court creates. Today, the threat is to birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, a different administration may try to seize firearms from law abiding citizens or prevent people of certain faiths from gathering to worship. The majority holds that, absent cumbersome class action litigation, courts cannot completely enjoin, stop, even such plainly unlawful policies unless doing so is necessary to afford the formal parties complete relief. That holding renders constitutional guarantees meaningful in name only for any individuals who are not parties to a lawsuit. Let me read a couple other lines. The president's mandate to exercise his executive power does not permit him to rewrite the Constitution or statutory provisions at a whim. This court endorses the radical proposition that the president is harmed irreparably whenever he cannot do something he wants, even if what he wants to do is to break the law. That is the absurdity of this decision. Here's another example. Suppose an executive order barred women from receiving unemployment benefits or Black citizens from voting. Is the government irreparably harmed and entitled to emergency relief by a district court order universally enjoining such policies? The majority apparently would say yes. That is the implication of this decision. In other words, it doesn't matter that those nine justices all agree that birthright citizenship is the law of the land, and then this executive order is unlawful, illegal, unconstitutional. This fucking court is saying you don't. We're just going to ignore that, and that doesn't matter. Uh, the the government is irreparably harmed
Yeah.
if there is a nationwide injunction. So I just want people to understand what a big deal this order is. And like so many of these orders in the short term, it's about Donald Trump and he will abuse the hell out of this. He's already cheered it on camera over the weekend, embraced it. But any future president will be able to use this same authority, recklessly writing an executive order that is plainly unlawful and will not have the ability of any lower court to strike it down. And there'll be all sorts of hoops that will needed to jump through to uh, to declare it unconstitutional. So that's my little rant about that. Highly recommend people reading the full opinion and especially the dissents, which were as fiery as I've seen
Yeah.
in a Supreme Court opinion.
Of course, I ran the John Roberts confirmation process from the Bush White House. I was in charge of it, and it will be 20 years since Chief Justice of the United States Roberts has sat on the bench, and it is a disastrous tenure. He presides over the most financially corrupt and self-dealing court in history that has lost the confidence and the trust of the American people. And that's on him. And he talked about that extensively at his confirmation hearing. And he was not able to deliver because he's an ivory tower lawyer who's never lived in the real world. He's a political creature of elite law schools who worked in a White House, who went to the federal bench after a big law firm, right? He spent his entire life in Washington, D.C., and Bethesda. He is as cloistered as a Benedictine monk from the 15th century. John Roberts talked about at his confirmation that John Roberts would be an umpire. John Roberts isn't an umpire. John Roberts is an activist. John Roberts is a legislator in robes. And John Roberts has made an American president a king. And John Roberts has turned a blind eye to reality because he once understood it. Talks in his confirmation that the Soviet Constitution had all of the same rights as the American Constitution. What it lacked was a rule of law. And what this does is eviscerate the rule of law and hollow it out by shattering precedent in the service of politics for an aberrational president who is abusing his power, breaking the law, and now hiding behind these procedural rulings to assert powers never contemplated. And the court says we're above politics. It is stupendously frustrating because it's also nonsensical. It's so disingenuous. It's so dishonest. But this guy, Roberts, goes down with the chiefs of the Dred Scott decision, the Plessy versus Ferguson decisions, just the bottom of the barrel in the history of the country when it comes to what we appreciate through an American lens of these last 80 years is what justice is supposed to be. And so this is judicial engineering. This is a ruling in search of a cause, and the cause is MAGA. And the right of MAGA to do as it pleases, to take from whomever it wants, regardless of the rights. And so the encroachments, whether it's the chaining up of a Canadian tourist because somebody doesn't like the JD Vance picture on their phone, or whatever the case may be, the lawlessness is now a feature of both the executive and the legislature and the judicial branch.
And
And they have ceded their power to a tyrant who lives in a delusional space where there's no facts, there's no truth. It's just whatever he thinks or says or believes or posts on his Truth Social at 3 in the morning. It's madness.
and just so I don't want people to think that you're exaggerating, Steve. I want to read one final paragraph, the end of this dissent from the three liberals on the court. I mean, these three women are their hair is on fire trying to get through to the public about what's going on. And I think it's worth reading a little bit more just to put an exclamation point on exactly what you just said. The court's decision is nothing less than an open invitation for the government to bypass the Constitution. To bypass the Constitution. Bodie over there agrees with that. The rule of law, this is the final paragraph of this dissent. The rule of law is not a given in this nation, nor any other. It is a precept of our democracy that will endure only if those brave enough in every branch fight for its survival. Today, the court abdicates its vital role in that effort. With the stroke of a pen, the president has made a solemn mockery of our Constitution. Rather than stand firm, the court gives way. I have read a lot of dissents. I love reading dissents because that's where all the energy, often where all the fire and energy is in these big cases. But I I haven't read a dissent like this in a long time that is warning about something as basic as the rule of law. The last time I saw a dissent like that was at the end of the term last year in 2024, the final case decided on the last day of the Supreme Court's term, just as this decision came on the last day of the Supreme Court's term. And that was the decision immunizing Donald Trump basically from any crime committed as president and writing essentially the what foreshadowed the expansive executive that we are seeing here today. And the Supreme Court, once again, a year later, has opened the door to an even more frightening, more um, presidency on steroids than even what they did a
Yeah.
year ago.
There's another important implication in this, and the decision, and it's this, right? The decision destabilizes the society because for the first time, it divides who and who is not an American citizen on the basis of what state you happen to be born in, right? On this
And whether you
question
can
of
afford to file a law, yeah, absolutely. And whether
birthright
we,
citizenship, right?
absolutely.
So you have the exact same child, right, born in the exact same circumstances, is an American citizen in New York and New Jersey and California, but not in Oklahoma and not in Ohio and not in Alabama and Mississippi. And what you have to do is go all the way back to the Kansas Act, right, for there to be a bifurcation of rights on the basis of territory in such a manner, right, breaking up what had been a status quo. And of course, that set the country on the course, right, for the ultimate resolution of the question of slavery, which was by fire and blood, not by compromise, as was always predestined. And so it is a societally destabilizing decision, and you just have to look at the court in the ages of some of the conservative justices and have an appreciation. You have to be able to win elections, right? Like terrible consequences,
Yeah.
right, for losing elections, right? And so I've beaten this like a mule, right? But it seems like it's always a good time to say this again when you look at the damage is going to be done. Is that any person, they're on a television show, at a political committee, senator, right? So somebody who's in the political process who wants to anoint a candidate, their candidate, themselves without competition, right? Who wants to ignore, right, the where the American people are in politics, wants to pretend, the way everyone pretended with Biden and got in line. This is the fucking price. And this can never, ever, and I mean fucking ever happen again. Right? And so the Democratic Party has to win, right? Has to have a candidate in each election that can win that election. It's got to deal with the ethics issues. It's got to clean itself up. Got to have an ethical party and a MAGA party. Got to have an honest party and a MAGA party. Right? You can't have a party that's as dishonest in some ways as the MAGA party. In fact, loses an election on fundamental questions of honesty to a party full of liars on a platform of we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and the American people evaluated it and said, go fuck yourselves, right? Time to hear the voters, time to meet them where they are, right? If you're a Democrat running for office, which means turning your back on the elected leadership, right? The corporate leadership of the Democratic Party stands for nothing, believes in nothing, can't communicate about anything to anyone in a meaningful way without 50 consultants and pollsters doing data tests and dial groups that reduce conviction to pablum, right? It's a suicide pact. And we got to get out of it, right? Or the country's gone. And there are leaders out there that have things to say. Lee Slotkin is one of them. Jake Auchincloss is one of them in the House. And Democrats better get their heads around the concept that the era that we're in requires living in this era and recognizing that the fence behind us now, right, that walls off the Obama era, the Clinton era, the Bush era, it's all gone. It's not coming back. Right? The world as it was for 80 years, the consensus that existed in the aftermath of the Second World War, all those people who rebuilt the earth after its most cataclysmic event, they're all dead. They're all gone. All their wisdom is gone. Right? They tried to pass on a lesson to the next generations, which was never again, always remember, never forget. And all of the things they tried to warn about have been forgotten, literally corresponding to the instant of their deaths, at least in the same decade. And just like that, you have in the White House a tyrant, a king, a man who has declared himself above the law and has been made above the law by the courts, by the Congress. Every institution has failed. Every place where you can look to say, well, they'll stop them there or here or there or there, all of it has failed. And so we're down to the last line of defense in this country, which is the most powerful force in human history, and that's the will of the American people. And so we will decide whether this country gets taken from us or we take it back. And that question gets decided in elections, right? What Donald Trump is doing, he has the power to do, but does not have a mandate to do it, doesn't have the support of the people to do it. But we don't get a vote for another couple hundred days. So it's about getting ready. It's about mitigating damage. It's about trying to slow the vandalism down, trying to make it stop. But boy, oh boy, right? Every person who's indifferent in this moment is in a neutral party. They are a MAGA ally. And so indifference plus MAGA may be enough to bring about the fall of the republic because it hasn't fallen yet, but it is falling, right? It is crumbling, right? And it does not have long on its current trajectory, right? The country doesn't have 10 years of this. We have two elections to stop it, right? And there has to be a check on Donald Trump. There must be a check on Donald Trump in the House of Representatives and everything else. And I just want to say one last thing. I want to talk about power. The state of California should pass a law immediately that's a template for every Democratic led state in the country. And we should stop this blue state and red state nonsense. There are no blue states and red states. There's only the United States. And there are Democratic led states and there are Republican led states. The Democratic led states should pass a law in their states that make it illegal for law enforcement to operate with masks. If the federal government wishes to operate a secret police force with masks, contrary to the law of the state, take the fight. But I'll say this, if I was the governor of California, I'd get that law passed. And I would make certain that the California Highway Patrol at the first instance arrested 6 of these federal thugs where I could get them. And I'd take their masks off as they're getting fingerprinted and photoshopped, as they're being booked into the jail, of which no doubt that they would be bailed out of. But they would be unmasked.
I think
and
that's a great idea.
there needs to be an unmasking project in this country. But the idea of a secret police force filled with cowards lurking behind masks is anathema to liberty.
Yeah, it's
And
outrageous.
identifying these people is an urgent moral priority. The idea that it is their safety who is at risk, no, it is the safety of the American citizen that is at stake from a masked police, secret police force.
It's a
Bullshit,
good it's a good
right?
idea.
And so the use of maximum power requires the use of reciprocal maximum power, but we cannot have a democracy in a perpetual contest between two maximalist powers. So we need somebody with the grace and wisdom to use power, but then to restrain themselves from its use when balance to the republic is restored.
Well,
That is the work of the next president.
yeah. Well, as I've said many times, that is my great fear is that this virus spreads and that the presidency that's being created under Trump, someone even worse comes along, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, and turbocharges all of these new powers that he is slowly accruing with the not just the implicit endorsement of Congress and the Supreme Court, but now the explicit endorsement. This bill and some version of this bill is going to pass. There'll be some drama in the Senate. There'll be some more drama in the House, but some version of it will pass. And the only question is, will it be horrendous in terms of its how many people it kicks out of off healthcare, or just really really bad? But some version will pass. Some version of the ICE expansion will pass, but it's an explicit endorsement of everything he's doing. And now the Supreme Court is doing the same thing. They have basically said the one bulwark against Trump's lawlessness, lower courts using nationwide injunctions, that has stopped Trump in 25 different cases. These courts that said, this is probably lawless. We're going to keep the status quo and the case will get resolved at the end. That's all an injunction does. It just keeps the status quo. The Supreme Court has said, nope, we're the only court that gets to do that. All of you lower courts, stop that right now. Watch Trump in the days and weeks ahead, what he does with this Supreme Court opinion. He has now been given a green light to write any insane executive order he wants. And the only danger he has is that the plaintiffs in the case the executive order might not apply to the single plaintiff. So, Steve, if he writes an executive order tomorrow that says, we can't we can't buy guns anymore. And you might go sue him and say, screw you, I want to buy a gun. And the court might say, okay, Steve Schmidt, you can buy a gun. So we're enjoining Donald Trump from uh, enforcing that executive order on you, Steve Schmidt, because you're the plaintiff in the case. But that's it.
Yeah.
That's all it extends to. That's what just happened. So imagine what the Stephen Millers in the White House are doing right now with this new Supreme Court ruling. Imagine the shit they are concocting. And I'm not making this up. These examples are from the three liberals on the court, just taking the
Let me
logic of the majority. So, but I've opened a
let
can
me
of worms
say,
there.
like,
But let's wrap up, Steve,
different subject for a different day, but
and then let's wrap up.
there's such massive corruption in the American bar. There's no words for it. And all of that corruption has led to this sorry place. But um listen, Trump's numbers are collapsing, and there have been dire moments in this country's history. And but boy oh boy, there's a fight on. And if you are a patriotic American who's ever wondered about living in interesting times and what would you do in the civil rights movement or in the 1850s in the abolition era, you're going to get a chance to prove yourself in one of the most momentous epochs in the history of the republic. And they do have control. They are on top of the hill, and we got to go back up there, up that hill, and knock them off of it and take the castle back. That house, that White House, belongs to us, not to him.
I agree. And, there's a lot of despair in the comments. A lot of people saying, "What can we do? This is terrible. The Supreme Court's not legitimate, etc." But
We're starting up a group, the Save America movement. Go over on Substack, follow it, get involved, go to the website. Um, there's going to be a lot of things to do in the months ahead, right? A lot of planning going on. You got a crippled political party, the Democratic Party in Washington D.C. You got some great Democrats, younger Democrats across the country that need to be into the leadership positions. We need a reformed Democratic Party. We need a reformed Democratic movement in the Democratic Party. And there has to be a plan to go out and to talk to people, meet them where they are without condescension, that is better than what has come before, because what has come before has led to this disaster,
I
and
would
we
just
got to
say
get out of it.
people shouldn't despair. Things, believe it or not, things have been worse in this
Oh yeah,
country, and the first step towards making things better is doing what you're doing, is staying engaged, learning about what's going on, joining a group, not being afraid to raise your voice. And I would modestly also say support independent media. I was
yeah,
a journalist in mainstream media for 30 years before I came to Substack. Should have done it years ago. And appreciate everyone tuning into this every week. Appreciate talking to you, Steve.
yeah.
And
My pleasure.
I'll
Good to
see you
see you.
here
See you next
noon.
week.
Gonna get in the car and drive back to DC now with the dog, and I'll see you. I'll see you a week from now. Thanks everybody
Yeah,
for
see you.
tuning in.
Bye.
Take care.